Mr. Rainwater.
Hey, John.
I'm back from my wisdom teeth removal that's not happening 3 days from now. But we're pre-recording anyway. Thank you for having that episode with Joker and Aaron. I understood nothing, but it was enjoyable to sit there and just kind of take in.
I'm curious to see if people will respond to it at all. I think it's the kind of conversation that I know that certainly me and Aaron have talked about wanting to have, because those are all topics that she's very fascinated in, and obviously topics that I'm very fascinated in, and something that I could talk forever about. But that's not really what we're gonna.
You had me with the Mothman stuff, because that movie has a special place in my heart. That was the first movie that I ever sat in a theater. Me and Buddy went to the theater to see it, and we were the only two people. Maybe there was like 3 or 4 people in the theater total, including me and him. And it was the first movie that I ever remember seeing that wasn't an intentional comedy, that was a comedy to me.
Right.
Because my filmmaker brain turned on halfway through, and there's a scene, and it's in the trailer, where the Mothman calls Richard Gere, and he's like, "What do I have in my hand?" And he goes, "Chapstick." And for some reason, there was an awkward edit or something that happens right after that scene where like Richard Gere's on a plane, and my brain Photoshop, After Effects, whatever you want to call it, the Mothman flying up to the window on the plane and rolling up a tube of chapstick into the window. And I don't know why, but I bust out laughing as hard as I fucking could and literally physically fell out of my seat laughing into the aisle, because I had this idea in my head of the fucking Mothman rolling up some chapstick outside of a plane window. I need to watch this
movie again. It's been so long since I've seen it. I don't remember that scene at all. That sounds amazing.
I think that was the one and only time I've watched that movie. And that scene, that moment lives rent-free in my head, only because of that. So I did enjoy part of it. I understood some stuff. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about embracing the mess, as you referred to it.
Which I think is something probably we all go through at some point in life, if not all life.
I'm curious to know how you interpret that, because I had a realization today that I feel like would be my interpretation of it, but I'm curious to hear yours first.
Actually, it's the topic started off after going to see Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is a movie. I haven't
seen it. Don't spoil nothing.
I'm not gonna, but I will say it's a movie I really enjoyed, but it is also a messy movie, and I liked it because it was messy. You know, like it was. Not every movie can work that way, right? And I think it works to the advantage of the story of that movie. But there are movies where, stories in general, where it can be messy and it doesn't work at all, right? And you're just like, ugh, what is this? And there are movies where the mess actually like adds something to it, where the creative like cornucopia that's on display actually elevates it instead of making it like annoying or obtuse or whatever.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that got me wondering, like, why is that, right? I know certainly intention is one of the main parts of that, right? You could not do what that movie does for just any story. You couldn't do that for like a Star Wars movie or a Marvel movie. You have to kind of stay on a particular track. But what were you going to say, Joe?
Well, my wife is homesick today. And what does one do when they're sick? You lay in bed and you watch Netflix.
Yeah.
And my wife watches what I watch, because in my house I am Lord of the Domain. The remote stays in my hand. And that's mainly because the stuff she enjoys watching, I cannot help but run commentary and as to why it's so bad. But today she's upstairs and she's kind of doing her thing and she's watching a show, and I go up to cook my dinner, and while the dinner's cooking, I have a lot of free time. Throw it in the fryer and you just gotta wait 7 minutes or whatever until the chicken's done.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I go and I sit down in the living room and I watch what she's watching, and it's some movie or TV show. It's like a limited series called Inventing Anna on Netflix.
Okay.
And I'm watching it, and I had heard from people, and I should have followed the age-old saying, consider the source. I had heard from people that it was a really good show. So I was like, oh, I'm kind of interested to see how this is. And I'm watching it. It's fucking terrible. Like, the execution of it is terrible. It's cringeworthy in the worst ways to me.
Mm-hmm.
And what does any cinephile do? You jump on IMDb. Who made this shit? And lo and behold, I find out it was a person. Do you know who Shonda Rhimes is?
I'm not familiar with that name, no.
Okay, I'm going to give you a name you are familiar with. Grey's Anatomy.
Okay, yeah.
Another show I cannot stand. It's so bad.
Well, and like Grey's Anatomy, if I understand, is kind of a primetime soap opera, baby. Basically, like it's been running for forever.
Yeah, I think it's like 14 seasons or something like that.
Yeah.
That's another show my wife watches.
Soap operas are like infamous for like embracing the mess in the sense that they're just like, just run with it, just keep it going, just run with it.
And ever since our workshop, like I have been coming comfortable to the point where I was going to fix that scene in Haunted, and then it all clicked to me today because I found a solution to what I wanted to do, and then part of me was like, that is so fucking pedestrian. It's so common. It's not even, you can't even dignify it by calling it classic. Like, it's just fucking terrible, the idea that I came up with that solved it. And it fails the, what's it called? The Beckmall test?
The Bechdel test?
The best, is that the one where two women can't talk about anything other than a man? Right. Fails that miserably. And I'm watching this and I'm like, well, this is terrible. And if I'm doing something terrible, but it still works for my story, fuck it. Just do it. Like, just do it. Yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm not settling for mediocrity. I want to make that clear. But at the same point, I can't get hung up on perfectionism.
Sure.
It is two sides of the same coin, right? Where both of them tank you. And I just realized I had an idea watching this. I'm like, this show is a mess. It's horrible. But it's like getting all these ratings and people are talking about it and this and that. It does so many things wrong. But I want to do something wrong, and I'm not letting myself do it. And I should, because why not?
There is a lot of power that comes from that, too, because here's the other thing. We put so much gravity into people who we esteem as like better artists than us, or, artists that we praise or whatever. And we assume that they make no mistakes, or like all their decisions are well calculated and thought out. Oftentimes they are not that calculated. Oftentimes they're very spur of the moment, and we take that for granted because I think partially because of a certain power that we attribute to artists, right? We think of them as like having some tapped in clue to reality, when in reality, I mean, it's just kind of, maybe we do have some intuitive sense of like what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes that mess can be part of the intuitive sense, right? Like sometimes that the messiness that we think of in art, or the sort of what you're talking about when you're just like, fuck it, I'm just going to go with this, even though I think this might not be 100% the right move. That is, I think, kind of necessary to be an artist, to be able to make mistakes. Honestly, it's the main reason why I want to remain an artist as long as I can, is because I like making mistakes. I like breaking rules. I like doing things that, like, I don't have a fucking normal job because I don't like following fucking rules. Like, that's the thing. That's the reason why I like writing stories. That's why I like drawing, and that's why it attracts me so much, is because, like, I get to make my own rules. I get to make my own systems of logic. I get to determine what works and what doesn't work within the framework. And there's feedback mechanisms. Like, there's an audience to tell me, hey, this isn't working, or hey, this is really working. To me, that's sort of and I think that's I think also maybe in your sense too, because like you had Digits, but you had a huge audience feedback on, right? And you're still working on Haunted, right? But like when you have that feedback mechanism, it does change a lot of the way you relate to the stuff that you make, because now it's not just like everything isn't hypothetical anymore, right? Everything suddenly is like you can kind of make a messy decision in your mind, and then people like it, and you're like, well, okay, fuck it, like if it works, it works.
That happened to
Go ahead.
Digits. There was a lot. There was a moment. I call it a place filler moment. It was the Helen Keller joke. I don't know if you remember that one, where they're waiting in line at the lunch line or whatever, and TS says to, fuck is his name, Lucas. He's like, she's leading around like a blind seeing eye dog, or no, she's leading him around like he's Helen Keller's blind seeing eye dog. Lucas looks at him and goes, Helen Keller didn't have a blind seeing eye dog. And TS just responds, and this was the fill-in dialogue that I just wrote as fill-in dialogue, no intention of leaving it. Well, maybe if she did, she wouldn't have been so fucking retarded. And that is such an off-color, like a terrible thing to say.
But the audience went for it.
It wasn't even the audience that went for it. It was the day, Dierico read the line or whatever, and I was like, oh shit, I was supposed to change that. And he was like, well, what am I going to say? And I was like, I don't know. He was like, all right, I'm just going to read the line and we got to keep going. And we just read the line and I was like, all right, I'll probably have to like edit it or something like that.
Yeah.
And I left it in because it was playing well and the audience went for it. They went for it. And I'm shocked. I don't know if they would still today, but yeah, sometimes like what we think is the mess is just like we've talked about trusting into intuition before. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you feel like a mess when it's just like, you tear down every single book off your bookshelf because you're looking for one.
Yeah.
And it's easier to look at the pile than it is to look at the binders in a neatly organized row. Like sometimes it just making the mess makes things easier to see and find.
The time that actually makes a lot of sense, because I think, the human brain's so pattern recognition like set, and sometimes you have to break the pattern in order for you to like find the thing that you're looking for. Sometimes you have to like create a little bit of chaos so that your brain will actually find that one thing. It knows what it looks like, but when you have it, organized in such a way where maybe it's too orderly, maybe it's too much together with other things that look too much alike it or whatever, you're not able to find it. And I definitely agree with what you're saying, is like when you introduce a little bit of chaos into it, it actually makes it a lot easier to spot, right? And you can in theory, you can use that sort of principle for like theme, right? Or composition, where you use a certain amount of mess or chaos to allow something to be easier to spot or to find.
I did that when I was shooting the test scene for Haunted. We were on the day on set, and there was a shot that just popped up in my mind, and it was only the only reason that I saw it was because of a mistake. I was getting an over the shoulder shot of Stango dressed as the greeter, and one of the actors kept kind of shifting their weight because it was kind of cold outside that night. And what I realized was this really cool like reveal of his face coming out from the side of the actor's arm was really fucking creepy. Like the light just hit perfect. And we took that shot, and it's probably my favorite shot out of the entire
Nice.
thing. I actually had him I had the actor stop swaying because it didn't work within the scene, but I did have Stango, shift his weight over, and it came in this like whole, like he's creeping around to look at the other person. One of my favorite shots. And if I get the opportunity, I want to recreate it when we actually shoot the feature. And that kind of stuff is the stuff that I love, is that stuff that you find, not the stuff that you make.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the whole Bob Ross happy accidents thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the whole idea, is like there are things that will happen that you don't expect that work out perfectly for what you're trying to do. So much of, like, I've watched so many fucking Bob Ross videos now going to bed. Like, I've started to really understand on an intellectual level, like, what his technique is. And it's really fascinating because basically what he did is he figured out how to break down different brush types into mimicking foliage, so that you're literally, like, all you're doing on the canvas is you're just repeating the exact same, like, it's not even a brush stroke a lot of times. If it's like, if he's doing like leaves on a tree or whatever, you're just like, I don't know what to call that, like plucking or whatever on the canvas.
Dabbing.
Yeah, and allowing the way that the brushes splay make that pattern, and you're just repeating that pattern over and over again, almost like you would do with like a stamp or whatever. And so, like, his technique for doing like snow on mountains is basically it's basically the interaction between the broadside of the knife and the canvas. And what happens is that because the canvas's surface is rough, it's not going to pick up all of the white of the paint. It's going to only pick up parts of it. And you don't know what to expect, how that pattern's going to turn out.
Right.
But because the logic all tracks, it works every single time, because you're just going with the pattern, basically.
Right. The eye of the viewer puts it together at the end. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, that's supposed to be a tree. That's a tree. And that's just, you know what I mean? Like, that's just how it becomes.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those things where you don't realize when you're watching a film that it's been color corrected or color graded. You watch it and you're like, oh, that's white. But it's not white wall. It's got an orange tint to it. But because you see that as white, or because you see everything else with the orange tint, that orange tint, your brain removes it somehow, and it sees that as white compared to the other colors that it already knows. And subconsciously, you absorb the psychological effect of the color orange, which gives you that warm, summery, old-fashioned, nostalgic glow, and it sets a mood for you. But your brain is like, no, that's just a white wall. Well, it's not a white wall. It's an orange wall. Because, you look at the skin tones of the people in the shot, and your brain just puts it all together. And that's the happy mess that happens, is your brain interprets it what it's supposed to be. And that's important when I think you're creating art, because we talked about the happy accidents. Happy accidents can't happen unless you allow them to. If you're so fixated on creating a perfect thing, then the accident can't happen, because you'll be like, nope, that's an accident, trash can, delete, undo, whatever it may be. And you might miss something perfect. So I think that's an important thing about the actors talk about this a lot, being present in the moment. And I think that applies to a lot of artists in every medium, where if you're not paying attention as you do it, like, you need to, like, a lot of people will be in a rush, or, oh, I know what I want to do, or blah, blah, blah. As you are working, you need to pause, step back, look, and just think, like, evaluate. Like, it's one of those things where it's time consuming. Yes, you shouldn't do it constantly, but at pivotal moments in whatever it is that you're trying to do, I think it's important to be really focusing on, well, I just made this mark. I didn't want to make that mark.
Sure.
Does that mark add to this? Can that mark become something else? Or does it distract? Does it take away? I think the big takeaway is, if you make a mistake or a happy accident and it distracts from your intention, that's when you need to tackle the mess and clean it up, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, go with it. I think it's important to like, and I know you're probably going to hate me for saying this as a illustrator, but you do work in a digital medium now, even though you could still do the same thing. But I don't like working in pencil when I draw, because occasionally I'll draw. I mean, if I wanted to, for the aesthetic of it, like the grayscale, like that kind of stuff, that's great. But the idea that I can erase very easily and fix does not appeal to me.
Working digitally is so fucking easy compared to
it's tempting, right? Though it's tempting to just discard the mess very easily, because all you have to do is hit undo or delete that layer, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or save as and then experiment with something else. Like, you can't commit to anything really. The only thing you could commit to is submitting after the deadline.
It is a different level, like trying to do a finished piece on analog, because it is a different way of having to commit to weird, like watercolor. I've talked about this before, but like watercolor is 100% you're committed as soon as you lay the fucking brush down. I mean, and I say 100%. I mean, there are ways to sort of fix some mistakes, but it's not easy, and you really have to plan everything out before you get in. And I definitely trained myself in the past to be able to work on paper, but as I've gone on and done more and more stuff digitally, I'm kind of like, yeah, this is better in terms of like work process. Like,
sure,
I'm just able to get so much stuff done, and I'm also beginning to find ways to actually introduce happy accidents into working digitally, like you're saying, like finding brushes. Now I have so many more brushes available to me, or methods available to me, that I really didn't want to try with paper, that I can do now digitally, where like lately I've been messing around with like a lot of texture in regards to like making more realistic looking stars, or like debris on rocks and stuff. It's just this one brush I found in Clip Studio. It's my favorite one brush right now because it works really well. But there's 100 other brushes that once I actually prod around and look at them, I'll be able to find other things to experiment with. But yeah, like you're saying, like something that makes art so wonderful to me is that experimentation, is that ability to be in a place where you don't have to commit to something immediately, right? You can try again, right? There's an opportunity to try again. There's an opportunity to like press the undo button. And there's not a lot in life that's like that, right?
No.
In fact, most of life is not like that at all.
You can't unsend a text anymore. You used to be able to. Now they don't let you.
You can't unsend a text. You can't redo a bad first impression. Like the world as it is full of high pressure situations, and certainly the reason. And I don't know. I feel like in this conversation I'm learning. I shouldn't say learning, but sort of solidifying stuff I've kind of always known about myself, which is like I'm kind of an anxious person. So like art's such a great place for me, because like I can just not feel anxious. I'm in control, like I'm in full control of what's going on. So anyway, I mean, what about for you, Joe? Is that sort of part of it, or is it kind of a different situation for you on a personal level?
What?
Well, because I was just saying, like, for me, what I like so much about art is because I have sort of a tendency towards over and analyzing things, or being kind of anxious about real world shit. This is an area where I have control. For you, is it about that, or is it sort of a different?
Well, I mean, there's an experimentation part of it for me, where, so it's no secret. I think you remember this. We've talked about this before. When I went to SCAD, I tried to reinvent myself. Right? You know what I mean? Like back home, a fair amount of people still called me Andy. At SCAD, anyone that I ever met at SCAD calls me Jow. Everybody. And that's by design. Like that, like I didn't want to be Andy. I wanted to have an identity. I wanted to be an artist in that sense, where it was like, oh, there's a million people named Andrew. and or Andy or this or that. And there's not very many people, if any, named Anjao. And that was an identity to me. And, you know, the rapper part that fell apart quickly. So did the Batman kid thing. And eventually it just became me. And the idea that I could play around with personality to a fresh audience, if you will, and tap into things that once my pre-established personality at home would be ridiculed for dabbling in was shed, I could start inhabiting different things that interested me. Do you know what I mean? Like, the idea of cosplay in 2008 was few and far between. People did it, but it wasn't like a generally accepted thing. So the idea that you could go to a college class wearing a Batman utility belt, wearing your Batman t-shirt, you know what I mean, with a Batman ball cap, was a little bit out there. And I was enjoying being on that front line, I guess you could say. I'm not saying I invented cosplay, not far from it. But
SCAD was certainly one of the few campuses where you could get away with it.
Yes. And it was that kind of thing in art is what's exciting to me, the experimentation about everything and that's the thing, is like, as I grow up, there are other things that I want to try and do. Like, I want to play a guitar. I want to try and do this and do that. Well, every time I try to learn something, the people that already pre-establishedly know me go, they scoff, they laugh, they mock, they ridicule. Mostly they're not artist people. But the people who are, like, if I told you right now, I think I'm going to learn how to play the guitar, the first thing out of your mouth would be like, that's awesome. How, you know, what kind of guitar are you thinking about? Who are you listening to? What kind of music you think you're going to play? Blah, blah, blah. Like, that's encouraging. That's supportive. In art, I can do that under a veil. I can be characters in my story that I've wanted to, like, I've wanted to be the go-go guy. I've wanted to be an asshole. I've wanted to be, you know, in all these situations, but I don't want to do it because those things have real life consequences. In my art, I can be all of those things. I can be weird. I can be normal. I can be funny. I can be evil. I can be an asshole. I can be inspiring. I can be hopeful. I can be, like, there's so many different things that I can do, and there's a shield between me and the art. Like, a lot of people do blur the line between, you know, art and artist, and they will, you know, hold the art accountable because of the artist's act, but not vice versa. A lot of times you can get away with a lot of things in art, at least you used to. And the artist, if they haven't mouthed off on social media as much as I have, could get away with it because it was like, oh, he's commenting on this, he's not supporting this. So you never knew. And to some extent, for me, that still exists. And I love that idea that I can kind of express things that I don't in my normal day-to-day life that I can't. And it's invigorating to watch the people react, disassociating me from the work. Does that make sense to you? Like, when I had Digits come out, my dad praised Bobby Schultz for the performance of Dan. Oh, everything he said came out so funny. He said this, it was such a stupid line, but da-da-da-da. Not realizing I wrote that shit. You know what I mean? Like, that's a goofy me on screen doing that. And Bobby, I'm not saying Bobby's a bad actor because he's not. But Bobby is in way the conduit of it. Do you know what I mean? He's visually interesting as opposed to me green screening myself 12 times on the screen like a Neil Breen movie. And I've said the magic word to make rainwater get interested. But the idea that I can do that kind of stuff is really what appeals to me. And that's where the mess is, because my brain is a hodgepodge of, I want to try, and I think this goes to every artist. I want to try this. I want to try that. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to start this. I want to finish that. I want to do that, but I got to do this, but I want to try that. That looks like fun, blah, 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 blah. Throw it in a script.
Yeah.
And that mess becomes joyful for me because it's like, oh, I'm out there as Goofy Jow, but I'm not out there. I'm not accountable for if people don't like it.
Yeah, my brain right now is so fixated on this idea about personality, right? Because like it's interesting because you're so I think that's what makes you attracted towards being a director and wanting to work with actors, because you can do that whole fluid personality thing, right?
Right.
Which I do through the characters that I write and draw, but I have wondered sometimes if I need to embrace some amount of acting or like do some kind of performance for
Same.
myself, for the purpose of just like getting outside of a comfort zone, because like the life of a writer artist is so insular, right? And I don't really interact with humans that much, and so just the way I just said that sentence says everything. But like I don't interact with other people very much, so like I kind of feel like when I interact with the rest of the public, I am just putting on like this robotic, like, okay, this is how I operate with people kind of thing. And I do think a lot about like, okay, well, what the fuck do I look like to the outside, to people who don't know me at all? Like, I'm just like some rando, right? How do I better impress people with an idea of what my personality is, right? Outside of my art, because like not everybody's going to read my art. I don't have an answer completely to that, because I get very over analytical about like, oh, am I going to seem too much like this? Am I going to seem too much like that? That makes me sort of socially inept, right?
Sure.
Well, like I'm gonna say this based on like knowing you and Matt, you and Joker at SCAD, like y'all are the two more socially out people compared to me. Like y'all are the more extroverted types compared to me, where it was like y'all were able to sort of more, I think, competently interact with people, and I would in my typical way, like I built friends off of my friends' friends.
Well, that's how that works. That's how you make friends. Like you share friend groups, which is why I hate when people don't do that. But
sure, I'm thinking about that a lot right now, because I'm kind of starting a new life in a new place, and like I know some people here, but like I kind of have to reinvent like making friends again. And I'm kind of going through this mode of like, what the fuck did I do when I was younger? Like,
well, you were forced into situations that made you do it, whether it was class or dorming or anything like that. I mean, if you look at most people in day-to-day jobs, you don't even have to be an artist to identify with this. You have a day job, you go to work at Kmart, your coworkers become friends. Right? Like it's just that's how that works. You go to church. Oh, you make friends with the people that you sit near all the time. Oh, you go to karate club. Oh, you make friends with the instructor. Like that's just how it goes, is that routine of continuously seeing the same people. And, that's what starts doing it. As far as you being socially inept compared to us, there was two reasons why I could justify that. Or that I would not say that is because, number one, and I said this a million times when we lived together, and I'll say it a million times again, you were a horse. You were just fucking working. You were prolific, constantly arched over that table working, and I admired you for that. And it was like, to me, I wish I had that kind of work ethic, because I do have that kind of work ethic, but I don't go for it as often as you did. And I do regret that. I'm much more likely to put on a movie and lie to myself and say that I'm watching the movie a millionth time. The second thing, because if there was if we're having a scene, right, set, interior party, Jow, Rainwater, and Joker are at a party at fucking SCAD. The first thing that's happening is Joker is trying to get us to be like, hey guys, isn't this cool? I told you these guys were cool people, blah, blah, blah. The next thing is me going, so much fucking booze. Why is everybody drinking? Why can't we just have fun talking about blah, blah, blah? Meanwhile, you would be standing there in the middle holding a red cup, silent. And I would not characterize that as socially inept or anything like that. My brain sees rainwater as observing, processing, and waiting for the moment to strike. Because
I mean, that is a thing that I have done for sure.
you have that ability to wait patiently for the in where you have the thought that stirs everyone else's brains, which I think is one of the reasons why Trailer Park Warlock is doing so well, is because yes, it's a comedy, but you do have an upside down way of thinking or looking at things
Sure.
that a lot of people don't see it. But when they see it your way, they go, huh. And not in a confused way, but in a you have just restarted my mind. You've hit the reset button on how I'm approaching this. And to me, it wasn't that you were like socially afraid or unafraid, not able to make friends. It was just that's how rainwater works. Like he's the very
true.
incisive friend, and that's the role that you played in my brain. If that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense for sure. Absolutely. And I mean, that's not really a persona that I really have any interest in tossing away, At the same time, like, it's weird. I don't know. This is a weird thing about being a writer is that I don't know if you get this where it's like when you inhabit, or I say inhabit, but like play another mind in your head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever have moments where it's like you start to wonder if that rubs off on your personality in some way? Yeah.
Frequently. I feel like, how like they say like a method actor gets too far into character and it drives them crazy.
Yeah.
Go into if you could inception your brain into the mind of another writer, or if a normal person walked into the mind of a writer, they would go insane. And the reason we're not insane is that we understand we are insane in that sense, where it's the only reason, the biggest place where it hurts me the most is, and this is a very big point in Haunted, I see every side to an argument or a conflict, and I see no bad guy. I see the reason why someone thinks a certain way that they do, and I understand it, and the human part of me empathizes with it.
Yeah.
Even if their actions or their intentions are cruel and evil and horrible.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, I understand why. And that's why I don't want to call myself a contrarian, but I definitely feel the need to stand up for sometimes for those people. And I think that gets me into trouble.
It's interesting too, because I think for both you and me and for a lot of artists, that trait can often lead to depression, because depression is really in a lot of ways a response to that complexity, where you see things from a less intensely moral gaze and see it more from where you're empathizing with as many people as possible, and it's like an overload of taking all that in. Because when you look at it at a certain point, I mean, I know when I look at it at a certain point, like, it is extremely overwhelmingly depressing to sort of look at the world of like everybody's hurting each other, and yet they're trying to do the best they can for themselves and each other, right?
Yeah.
It's like a lot of times people hurt each other under the premise that they're trying to help, and vice versa. So like going back to the mess and the chaos, which is actually kind of wraps into some of the themes of the movie that I talked about earlier. Going back into the chaos, like it's hard not to look at it and just kind of want to throw your hands up at times. And art obviously is a great like way to work through that, and a great way to like not be caught in that undertow. Because another thing, I have this running theory, not just dealing with depression, but like generally, I think artists are people who have found a way to make mental illness functional. Like, we've found a way, like, I think to a certain extent, the way that writers oftentimes can inhabit another mind for a moment is like almost like a borderline schizophrenic sort of thing, or like what is the name of that condition? It used to be called multiple personality disorder.
Bipolar?
Not bipolar. It's called something different now, and I can't remember what it is. But just being in a place where you can sort of switch personalities, that is not like.
Oh, multiple disassociative something
Yeah,
or
that's
other.
what it is. It's
Yeah.
dissociative. Yeah, dissociative disorder. That is not something like normal society really embraces a lot, right? And most of the people you will meet in your life don't really do that. They don't have that.
It's a superpower that they don't have, in my opinion. That's how I frame it.
I think that's the best way to look at it. I think that as an artist, I think you should look at it that way. But going back to empathizing with everything, right? I frequently will look at things from normal, quote unquote, normal person society. What I mean is like societal norms, right? Societal norms will look at that from their perspective and think, what is up with this person, right? Like, and that is I feel like not necessarily every, but like that is so many artists, right? And why so many writers probably tend to be more reclusive, because it's hard to see yourself as being able to fit in with the rest of society when you recognize like so many other different voices in your own head that often sound like people you end up meeting in fucking real life. That's the weirder part, right?
It's true.
Like one of the weirdest things I've ever had in my life is like I drew a cartoon character, and then like I showed this character to my friend Austin, and then we went to a Mexican restaurant and met a guy who looked pretty much exactly like this cartoon character. And we both were just like, what the fuck? Like,
manifested it.
Yeah, that kind of stuff it creeps me out, right? Like,
sure.
And that's something that, if you're a less artistically inclined person, you look at that and you're just like, like it's not a relatable thing, basically.
It's have you ever seen that episode of Community where Abed is like a soothsayer and he tells them everything that's going to happen?
Yeah.
It's very much that. Like, this is one of the reasons why I love that show. Artists have an ability to understand people instantly. Like, if you say 3 sentences in front of me, I automatically can start figuring you out. And when you ask me a question, I know why you want to know that answer or why you asked that question. One of those two, if not both. And when you have that ability, you immediately can follow the through line on how things will go for people. It's so weird. But like in high school, sometimes even a little bit in college, everybody used to come to me for advice when they were dealing with stuff like, oh, I like this girl. Oh, I don't know if I should take this job. They would come to me and I would be like, no, this is going to happen. Then that's going to happen. Then this is going to happen. And you're going to feel like this. And people would be like, and they'd shrug me off. And I swear to you, it became a thing where I demanded people sing "You Were Right" to me. I mean, granted, that's an ego stroke that I absolutely love getting. But, at the same time, what I would really like is for people to just trust me right off the bat. And that's just not going to happen. But it's an ability that artists have that not a lot of people do, is to understand, as Abed says in the episode, I'm a student of character. I know, you know what I mean? Like, it's not as complex. People are not as complicated as they would like to be.
That is actually, that is a really interesting point. I think that might be the thing that makes people uncomfortable around perceptive people. I won't just say artists, but perceptive people in general, where it's the same way that, people feel around like psychologists. Like that idea of somebody who can read, they don't really read your mind, but like they can pick up aspects about your personality and even predict actions that you're going to make based off of things that they're reading from you
Yeah.
in front of you. It's the same way that like fortune tellers, fortune tellers can like, make a buck off of people, is because they can do cold reading where they can just like, okay, I know I can deduce based on the way that this person is talking, what they're wearing, all this other stuff. Like I can deduce this about them and make some pretty accurate predictions.
Yeah. And if you're going to a palm reader or something like that, when you walk through the door, there's a reason why you walked through that door, and they know it.
Yeah.
Someone passed away, or you're dealing with a difficult situation in your life. No one who wins the lottery walks into a palm reader.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you walk into a fortune teller shop because you're dealing with an issue and you're looking for guidance, and they know that right off the bat.
Right.
I don't know whether or not, ESP and stuff like that is actually possible. Right. If you want more information on that, go listen to the last podcast.
Well, I will say there are a lot of people who get into like, palm reading, tarot, whatever, because it's cheaper than counseling, basically, and they're just looking for some kind of something.
Sure.
To help them make a decision, and that's something that I'm becoming more aware about. Like I know that when I originally got into tarot, I was having a lot of hard times making major decisions in my life. So that was like a mess that I was just going to embrace and just be like, okay, let's see where this goes. And I'm coming at this point now where I'm just like, okay, this is becoming less and less of a useful tool for helping me make decisions in my life. And that is I'm going through this transition moment through that right now, because it's almost like coming off of a crutch, basically.
Okay.
Where I was beginning to realize like, oh, I keep thinking about everything within these archetypes, and I would like to sort of expand my modes of thought, right? And be able to embrace other things, not feel so uncomfortable with like scientific stuff in the same way that I was previously, because I got myself into this mental pattern where I would feel uncomfortable about scientific stuff because it kind of contradicted my, new agey bullshit stuff that I was sort of holding on to help counsel myself. So it's like, I kind of have to let one thing go to a certain extent to embrace the other thing. Because now I'm getting more into this mode of like wanting to gather data, wanting to be more information centric in my decision making, which is something that actually makes more sense than just like fucking reading a tarot spread. What are you gonna say, Zhao?
I just want to speak to you as someone who lives in that realm of give me as much information as possible and then I will make the decision. Yeah. You're gonna end up right back where you're starting right now. Because at some point the data is gambling. It's still odds. Yeah. It's still a roll of the dice, because you could say, oh, the odds say this number will roll the most times, so that's what I'm going to go with. And then you put $10 down about it, and it didn't roll. Well, I expected that. And you put down $5 on it. That's okay. It's going to come up. You put down another $10. Why isn't it working? Is this guy cheating? You put down another $5. What the fuck? What's not going? And then you come back to it, and you say, okay, that was an anomaly. Data is still something to go with. And then you arrive at the point where I am now, and this is this is the carefree moment where everybody wants to be, and this is where I'm currently living with, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And you live in a different realm with those kinds of decisions. Like, I'm not saying that I don't still take in consideration of data, but at the same time, I also roll the dice. And, the kind of tarot card mindset. My version of it used to be, like if I was going to JO's at SCAD, and I'd be like, all right, if there's chicken tenders, then I'm going to stay home tonight. But if there's the pizza cheeseburger, I'm going out. You know what I mean? Like that kind of mentality decided my future. I didn't make any choices. And after a while, it's just like, all right, well, why don't you just do what you want to do and let yourself be happy? Do you want to go out tonight? No. All right, don't go out. What do you want to do? I want to watch a movie. All right. Do you want to go out tonight? Yeah. Should you go out tonight? No. What should you do? I'm going to go out for a little while and I'll come back. I'm not going to go out for, you know what I mean? And that's just kind of like, it comes back to good old Thanos. I'm all about balance. And that's where I kind of landed, where it's like, oh, I need a lot of this data, but at the same time, I need a little bit of the chaos, like the tarot or the roll of the dice or the chicken fingers. Like I need to take the two, and then I need to balance them for my expectations, which is the big point of it, is understanding your expectations, and then make a decision. You make an informed gamble, and you temper expectations accordingly, and life starts getting a lot easier. And that's where I've been living for the last 2 months, where it's just like, all right, have fun. You know what I mean? Like, I don't get it. And I mean, granted, a lot of it is probably because I've switched to caffeine free. I'm not as uptight as I used to be, but you know, you gotta kind of embrace the mess, not to bring it full circle, but it's like, okay, some things are going to go the way I want. Other things are not. And if they don't, and a lot of that, I want to say it's wisdom, because at 35, almost 36, no decision in 35 years and plus has killed me or bankrupted me or killed somebody else. You know what I'm saying? The odds of it being okay are on my side. And that gives me comfort. And I know you were talking before about anxiety and that kind of thing. I live in that realm now where it's like, well, people are going to come and go from my life, and I'm okay with that. Yeah. And money is going to come and go, and jobs are going to come and go. Like, my job has been flimsy as hell the last 2 years because of the pandemic and other factors. And, you know, if you had 10 years ago told me, oh, you might lose your job, I would freak the fuck out. What am I going to do? How am I going to get a job? Where am I going to get money? How am I going to eat? Blah, blah, blah. And now it's just like, all right, well, I'll get another job. And it's like, oh, you can get another film job? Well, I'm going to try to. And if I have to get a job at McDonald's flipping burgers, I'll get a job at McDonald's flipping burgers. And if I have to budget what I eat, then I'll budget what I eat. If I live off ramen for a month and you know what I mean? Like, it's a very carefree experience at that point where you get to that balance where it's like, okay, I'll flip burgers at McDonald's, but I'm still going to keep applying for jobs while I'm at McDonald's.
Yeah.
That's, you know what I mean? That balance of work, suffer, happiness, all of that kind of stuff is the mess. And we just live in it. And occasionally you find a $10 bill in the mess, or a crayon, or a friend.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Go on, Joe.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, all I was gonna say, I just really wanted to validate what you were saying, because I'm right now, I'm really responding to it a lot, because like I think after watching Everything Everywhere All at Once, like, that movie kind of got in my head, and there's just been a lot of stuff going on in my life lately where you know, what originally inspired this topic, you know, and just thinking about it, and coming to a realization that, so previously in my life, where I am right now, I am able to acknowledge, like, previously in my life, I would not be able to acknowledge where I am right now, which is that lately I've been having a certain amount, like, I can acknowledge when I'm having anxiety. And that's a huge change that's happened in my life. Because previously I would just, you know, make bad decisions, or like make decisions that aren't fully based on wholly rational, informational kind of stuff, and then just beat up on myself. And now I'm like, oh, okay, this is like, whatever. The anxiety has returned and made it more difficult for me to make fully rational decisions in my day-to-day life. And I'm making more panicky kind of decisions. And that allows me to actually, like, tune, like, meditation's been really great for this, because it's allowed me to kind of tune my brain in a way where I can just be aware of it. And this is all just framework to say, like, what you just said gave me a lot of pause to think about, like, how I think that's a useful way to look at life as it occurs. Because part of what is so difficult, this is going to get into a conversation. I mean, like, getting older, one of the harder things about getting older is you sort of lose more and more of your grip on your expectations. And that's sort of scary at first. Because when you're younger, you've got like the starry-eyed vision of the future. And then as reality begins to set in over time, and as you become aware of inertia that sets in as you get older, right? That gets a little spooky, because then it's like, okay, my percentage chance of these starry-eyed visions working out the way that I thought they were going to work out are beginning to decrease over time. And there's only so many different routes that I can now take. And that, I think, like what you were saying in response in regards to like embracing the mess of it, I think that is incredibly encouraging, because it also sort of allows me to sort of let go and be like, well, you know what? I've gotten this far. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've gotten this far with Trailer Park Warlock. I didn't even expect it to happen at all, and it's happened this well. So, like, who knows what'll happen next? What are you gonna say, Chow?
100,000 subscribers.
Not yet. It's not. It's
New York
98K.
Times best-selling artist. You were the colorist for a comic book that got turned into a video game, correct?
No, reverse. It was a comic book based off of a video game.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, it's still cool, you know, like,
yeah.
And it's a book that a lot of people have read too. And that's the weirdest part, is that I still get acknowledgement from people on Plants vs. Zombies, when I thought, like, this has got like a 5-year half-life. And it keeps going, so I don't know.
Now here's the other thing. Turn around, jump in a time machine, go back to SCAD, and tell yourself all of that is going to happen.
Sure. Yeah, I had no idea what was going to happen. So,
but you in 2008 sees that and goes, shit, Marvel and DC must be calling me. I must be living in a mansion. I must be the consultant on the new Spider-Man movie. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's these delusions of grandeur that we all set ourselves up for, that we think our accomplishments will bring, and it's just not the case.
Yeah.
Like, if you can go back in 2008 and tell me, hey, you made a feature film on your own. Hey, you won like 24 screenwriting awards for this horror movie. Hey, you know, like, there's so many things that you could do or whatever. I would be like, shit, who's my agent? And you'd be like, oh, you don't have an agent. Would I just negotiate myself? Oh, no, you don't get paid a lot of times. You said I won awards. Yeah, it doesn't mean shit. You know what I mean? Like, the allure of a lot of the glitter and the glam that comes with those kinds of things, that I don't want to stereotypically attached to accomplishments, doesn't exist. And you start realizing, am I chasing the glitter, the lights, the fame, the celebrity, the finances, the house, the attention, the car, you know what I mean? Like, sex, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
All that stuff starts falling away. And it's kind of like how you were talking about the expectations, where once you've settled on your expectation, or you understand what your expectation should be, is a way to put it, you start asking yourself the question, all right, why am I really doing this?
Yeah.
And, you know, I say it all the time, we're working our shit out. That's part of working your shit out. And then part of it is going, I'm doing this because I like making movies. I'm doing this because I like making comics. I'm doing this because I like I like the feeling when one person comes up or sends me an email and says, I really loved that. That was awesome. Can I get a hard copy? Can I get a da 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 da? Like, you don't like the 100,000 people, fucking amazing. That's a great accomplishment. But when that number tips to 100,000, you will pour yourself a glass of your happiest drink. You might, grab a bag of shrooms or whatever it is that you do, you weird drug addict.
I wish it were that easy to get a hold of shrooms, but yeah.
But you will celebrate that milestone, and then you will wake up the next day, and it means nothing anymore, and it's over.
Yeah.
And you have to pick up the pen again, and you have to write the next episode.
Yeah.
And that is something that cannot be taught to someone in 2008. That is something that cannot magically be waved over your head with a wand. You need to go through the shit to get to it. It's like Andy Dufresne in Shawshank Redemption when he literally crawls through a tunnel of shit to get to his happiness. The rest of us are going through that shit, and if you can stop and step back from the mess like we talked about and just in the middle of the process and go, this is for a reason. The universe is telling me, hey, don't look at that. Look inside. Look in here.
Right.
Acknowledge what makes you smile. Acknowledge what one day when you got out of bed that day and you were excited for something. Acknowledge why that thing got you excited. Chase that. That's, you know what I mean? And like,
yeah.
You don't get the bestseller on New York Times. You don't get the 100,000 people, but you go to bed and you're happy. And that shit is worth so much more. Right. So much more than any of those accolades. And when you embrace the mess and you realize, all right, this shit, blah, 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 blah. Like you read all the time, there's those clickbait articles that pop up on Twitter and Facebook and all that shit where it's like, oh, this person made it at 52. And I was like, oh, shit. And you're realizing at 35, 36, you're like, I'm kind of making it, but it's not what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, right.
So I'm just going to do it. And if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And at least I can live with myself and I'll know that my life was full.
That's definitely the mentality you have to embrace as an artist. 100%. Like you have to be comfortable. You have to be comfortable with the potential of failure.
No, you're not the potential. You need to, like you said, you seek it. You said that before.
No, you're right. You're not just comfortable with the potential of failure, but you're kind of inviting it to a certain degree. Like
come at me, bro.
Like you're even inviting failure in your success in a lot of ways, which I think is kind of what you're talking about. Because it's like you can hit some incredible number and still it's not big enough to like compete with somebody else who has an even bigger number.
We talked about that jealousy episode. Absolutely. And and not to get too long-winded and, hammer a dead horse, but there's a person in my life who will remain nameless. I know they don't listen to this podcast, so I don't give a shit. But I'm remaining nameless, who constantly starts arguments or fights with me and nitpicks choices that I do or berates me, mocks me, makes fun of me. A bully, if you would.
Yeah.
Not looking to cut this person out of my life in any way. In fact, I have found myself living on the danger zone when I go towards that person. And this is where I am contrarian and combative, where I will stand firm in opinions, choices, whatever it may be in that moment when they're voicing that, or when they're bullying, if you will. And I love it because 9 times out of 10, I win. And I feel so much better for standing ground on that than I do if I were to just cower and go, oh, well, who knows? Whatever, blah, blah, blah. It feels so like I'm not there to change their mind.
Yeah.
I'm not there to win. I'm there to defend myself. And in my mind, if I have defended myself, I still feel the same way at the end of it. You know what I mean? Like they've come at me with a counter idea, and I've gone up against it, and I'm still standing. That shit's a win.
Yeah.
That's a mess.
No, for sure.
That's part of the mess, the bully, the chaos, like, you know what I mean? The failures, like all of those things. That's like jumping into a pile of rusty, drug-addled needles and chainsaws with gasoline and a lighter. And you know what I mean? Like you jump into that pile of the mess. Somewhere in there is a pot of fucking gold. You know what I mean? And that's the idea of like, you could swim through an ocean of needles if you just learn how to do the stroke the right way so that you don't get stabbed as much.
Sure, I suppose.
I don't know. It's just an analogy that just popped in my brain. I imagined a person swimming in a sea of needles, getting stabbed and poked and horribly fucked up. But in the midst of doing that, they figure out how to get stabbed and poked less. You know what I mean? Like that pain was important. That chaos is important. It's what challenges you as an artist. And I think a lot of artists want to get challenged. And we do live in a world, I know this is crazy to say, but we do live in a world where people are afraid to speak their mind directly to you. Over the gauge of the internet, where anonymity, and they can make a fucking, a terrible ass drawing that looks like, some shit, and they just call themselves Mr. Scribbles or some shit. They can throw rocks all they want and whatever. But when it comes face to face, people are much less likely to confront you about stuff.
Yeah, well, also, like, people aren't real on the internet,
No.
like
They're bots. You didn't hear?
Wait, to just mirror what you're saying, like, when it comes to actual facing somebody face to face, that is where you see the truth of a person come out. Were you gonna say something to that, Joe?
Well, I was just gonna say that's where you come out.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that challenge?
Yeah.
I have now come to the point where I love bullies, if only for the fact that they give me the opportunity to make myself stronger. It's like looking at a weight. Do you know what I mean? That weight is going to break down my muscle. That's the point of lifting a weight, is to break your muscles, to hurt yourself so that you repair stronger. And I look at bullies the same way. I look at failure the same way. I look at, you know what I mean? Like I look at all of these things the same way. It's like I'm being broken down so I can rebuild better.
Yeah.
Build back better. And that's embracing the mess to me is that. I don't know if I could say it any better. I think I've said it for an hour and 10 minutes, a dozen different ways.
I like what you have to say on it. And I think that's a good bow on our topic for today, which is, folks, life gets messy. Entropy is a fact of the universe. It's chaos. However, I don't think that it exists as something to necessarily make our lives harder if we learn how to, surf the waves of it, to, as Chow put, swim in that trash bin of needles. If you can figure out how to fit into it or just navigate it, right? And it's learning how to navigate it. And in that navigation, you learn something more about yourself, and you also grow. It's an opportunity to grow. Chaos is always an opportunity to grow, for sure.
Opportunities, learning, I think, is the takeaway.
Yeah.
But you can't do it unless you are present and aware that the mess is there.
Yeah.
So look at the mess. Take a step back. I think we're good for this episode.
Yeah.
I am going in for my oral surgery this coming Friday. They threw out that random thing that they do as you get older, where it's like, here's your percentages of living and dying. I'm just having my wisdom teeth out. What? So with that, of course I'm paranoid, because my only one thing that I want right now in this world, I only want one thing, and that is to live as long as I possibly can to enjoy as much of my kid's life as possible.
Yeah.
That's my number one want. I want nothing more. So if I die, Nick, I love you more than anything in the world. Make good choices. Listen to all these podcasts. If you need advice, talk to Rainwater and not Mom.
Oh no. Your son's gonna be learning tarot, Joe.
That's fine. That's fine. Because if the spirit dimension actually does exist, I will come back and try and control the tarot cards in some way or something like that.
Interstellar.
Something to that respect. All right, that'll do it for us. We will see you next week unless I die, in which Rainwater will see you next week. Good night, everybody.
Good night.